What is up guys, this is Gnosis, and in today's video we're going to be looking at the best settings to be using for Season 5 of Fortnite. We'll be looking at ways to boost your frames per second, optimize your graphics settings, and so much more. Now let's get into it. Starting out here with display settings, you're going to want to be in full screen mode. Using any type of window mode can lead to input delay, which is obviously something we're looking to avoid here, so let's go ahead and leave this at full screen. For resolution, we're just going to want 1920 by 1080, the standard setting, but then on frame rate limit, this is going to be very dependent on both what you're running the game on, along with your monitor's refresh rate. The goal here is to cap the FPS at whatever your monitor and or PC caps at. For instance, I am on a 240Hz monitor, so I have mine capped at 240 frames per second. But if you're on a 144Hz monitor, you obviously would want it capped at 144 frames per second, and so on. There is the option for unlimited, but this does put a lot of unneeded stress on your PC, so I do not really recommend this one unless you do have a high-end setup. The positive of running unlimited, however, is that it can lead to reduced input delay, so this is something you should consider if you do have a PC capable of running it. Moving on to graphics settings, I just keep my brightness at 100%, but this is totally subjective, so I do suggest finding what works best for you. For colorblind, I've actually just recently switched to having this off. In the past, using various colorblind settings helped a ton in being able to see in the storm, but after the recent changes that Epic has made to the storm, I've found that it is now near impossible to see no matter what your colorblind settings are. So for me, I prefer to just leave this off now. These next settings are super important as they play a huge role in what your frames per second is, and the settings I have here will work best for any mid-tier PC setup. So for view distance, we're going to want medium since it is important to see enemies and items far away from us, but then for shadows and anti-aliasing, we do want to turn both of these off. Not only does turning shadows off boost your frames per second, but it also just makes the gameplay a whole lot easier. One of the hardest parts about playing on console was not being able to see enemies when they were in shadows, and being able to turn that setting off on PC is such a huge advantage that everyone should be taking advantage of. And again with anti-aliasing, all this does is make the edges of structures in-game look more smooth, but we don't really need that since we're more focused strictly on performance as opposed to graphics, so go ahead and turn that off as well. Now this one may surprise you a bit, but myself and some others in the Fortnite community have actually found that turning textures from low to high gives a boost in performance. Many videos may suggest you leave this one on low, but I know for me personally, turning this back up completely eliminated an issue with stutters I'd been having last season. Now your mileage may vary depending on your graphics card, but I do suggest trying this on high and seeing if it works for you. And now lastly, for graphics quality, we do want to go ahead and turn both effects and post-processing on low. Now on to advanced graphics, we do want VSync turned off as it is known to cause a great deal of input delay. Motion blur as well we're going to turn off as it can slightly affect frames per second, and generally it just makes things harder to see in game. For show FPS, you are always going to want to have this turned on as this is how we track how our game is performing. If you ever see this dipping consistently, you will know there's something that needs to be adjusted in your settings and will know to get that taken care of. Now for a big one, choosing which version of DirectX to run. Now this is going to be largely dependent on your PC as different PC parts react to these two choices very differently. Now for me personally, I run an RX 5700 XT graphics card, and my game never really seemed to run to its potential on DX11. But after switching to DX12, everything is incredibly smooth, and I very rarely drop below 240 frames per second. For others though, I've heard that DX12 can make their game choppy, so my recommendation is to spend a few hours on DX12 to see how it runs for you, and then go with whichever version seems to be better. The last setting we're going to look at on this page is allow multi-thread rendering, and in 99% of cases you are going to want to have this turned on. The only time I can think of that we would turn this off is if we are playing on a really outdated low-end PC, but for the majority of us this should stay on. Moving on now to our game settings, these are largely subjective, but I will give you a quick rundown as what I suggest for the most optimal settings possible. Now toggle sprint should always be off as there is never a time in game where you should be walking, and because of that, the sprint by default right under it should be turned on. Sprint cancels reloading I do have off, and then auto open doors is largely subjective, but for me personally, I like to have it off for when I'm holding an angle in front of a door on a house, and I want to be able to time when I open that door to take my shot. Now these first 3 options in combat are completely subjective, but auto pick up weapons, I recommend to have this off because you should have your action button to pick up guns bound to scroll wheel up as mentioned in my keybinds video, as this will be much faster than auto pickup and can be the difference between life and death if you 50-50 a chest off spawn with someone. Moving on to building, we obviously want reset building choice and turbo building both turned on, but for confirm edit on release, this is actually a highly debated setting within the Fortnite community. I personally play with this on and cannot imagine ever changing it. My speed on edits feels insane, and I really do not think I could keep that same speed if I had to fit an additional button click for every edit. The rest of the screen is pretty subjective, so just go ahead and set those to whatever you would like and feel most comfortable with. Now for heads up display option, the only thing I really mess with here is my HUD scale, and for me personally, I like mine on 75%. By bringing this down to 75%, I'm decreasing the screen space that my map covers in-game, which feels like a huge advantage so I can see more of what is going on around me. The last setting we're going to look at in this video is sensitivity, and this does really depend on what you feel most comfortable with. For me, I feel like my sweet spot is 5.2% with 800 DPI, as I feel I have steady control of my aim while also being able to flick quickly around for both builds and edits. Remember that if you play on controller, you can actually set separate sensitivities for aiming and building, which is such a huge advantage for every controller player and is really something I hope they bring to mouse and keyboard very soon. Alright guys, that does it for the best and most optimal settings for Season 5 of Fortnite. I am still using the same keybinds as last season, so if you're interested in those, you can click the bar on the top right of this video to check that out. And if you found this video helpful, please consider taking the time to drop a like and sub to the channel if you're new here. As always, you can catch me anytime on my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, or anywhere else. I'll have all those links in the description. And until next time, keep on grinding.